Hello everyone, my name is Heather. This channel is Heather Travels, where we make videos about all aspects of the travel experience. In today's video, I want to talk to you about traveling by train in Europe. One of the most popular videos on my channel is this one, which I'm going to link up above. And it's a pretty short video that I made very briefly showing our travel by train from Paris to Lucerne, Switzerland. Possibly because it's so short, I receive a lot of questions on that video. I do always try to answer everyone's questions, but I'm answering them so many times now that I felt for a while that I should really just make a video like this to answer some more general questions about train travel in Europe. Right away though, I want to give you two really helpful things. First of all, if you've only watched that first video where we traveled from Paris to Lucerne, make sure you watch the second video. This video, which I did link at the end of the first one, and it's a much longer, much more in-depth and comprehensive video about our travel back from Lucerne to Paris and then on from Paris to London on the Eurostar. That video doesn't have anywhere near as many views as the one where we travel from Paris to Lucerne, and I really think that is a more valuable video for people to watch because several things happen in that video that are kind of challenging for us. I have to tackle a lot more issues with train travel in Europe in that video than I do in the one where we go from Paris to Lucerne. The other thing I want to do is direct you to, it's both a website and an app that's really helped me a lot in all aspects of travel, and that is Rome2Rio.com or Rome2Rio, the app. What that app or that website does is you can plug in two destinations. They can be as close together as a few blocks. They can be as far apart as across the world, okay? And it gives you every possible way to get from one to the other. And it's really handy. It shows you all the options. It shows you which one is the fastest. It shows you which one is the best, like what do they recommend. It shows you which one is the cheapest, which one is the most expensive, all of that. So I really use that website and that app a lot to plan out ahead of time, I would say, before we go on trips or before we're going to do something or the night before we're going to go to a place to find the best way and the different routes. And so I know all my options. I mean, it gives you different forms of transportation: plane, train, ship, walking, taxi, all of them. And it tells you which is going to be the best. So you can make a really informed decision before you try to get from one place to the next. That will help you a lot in Europe when you're dealing with a whole bunch of different ways to get from one place to the other. Okay, this video will help anybody that's traveling to Europe, but I'm really going to be directing it mostly at Americans because I live in the United States and I have a lot of experience traveling on US rail, which is Amtrak. Amtrak, if you're not aware, kind of runs similar to the United States Postal Service. It's the official train service of the United States, but the government really doesn't give it any money. It's just like the Postal Service is. It's the U.S. Postal Service. It's the official postal service of the United States that delivers our mail, but it has not been traditionally supported financially by the government. So even though it's a government thing, it isn't really backed financially, and both Amtrak and the U.S. Postal Service are the same way. So that's why you see like the price of stamps going up all the time, and the price of train travel on Amtrak has increased a lot since I used to ride it with my dad all the time when I was younger. They kind of, like the government, like established these things, but then kind of leaves them to run themselves like a business without any real help. If you've ridden Amtrak in the United States, trying to travel by train in Europe is going to seem both so much better when you're there, but also very overwhelming and intimidating. The nice thing about Amtrak is it is just one system. Amtrak is the only way really that you can travel from place to place by rail in the United States. Now, I don't mean like only, because like obviously within cities or within regions, there's regional rail networks, or there's lots of trains in big cities, which we show on my channel all the time when we ride different metro and subway systems and all of that. And as far as covering the whole country, Amtrak is your only option in the United States. Now, that's true also in every country in Europe, or most of them, I think. Every country in Europe also has some kind of national rail. They have an official train network that's, run similar to Amtrak. That's kind of the official rail thing for that country. The problem is, in Europe, many countries have other options that are not the official national rail network. And obviously, there are a lot of countries in Europe, and every single one of them is going to have its own rail line, rail service that they run. So you have to keep in mind, especially if you're an American and you're used to being able to, you can ride your same Amtrak train all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast. Takes several days, but you can get all the way there on the same train. There's only one thing you have to do to book Amtrak tickets. It's all on Amtrak.com, or it's all on the Amtrak app. You only have to go one place to get train tickets in the United States. But if you're traveling in Europe, you're going to have to get your train tickets in several places if you're traveling in more than one country, or if you're traveling from one country to the next, perhaps. So it's complicated to figure out which trains you have to take and also to book tickets for trains in advance. But it is doable. The real advantage of train travel in Europe over train travel in the United States is train travel in Europe is far superior. It has far better infrastructure. There's way more trains. It covers far more areas. I mean, there's almost no rail coverage in the United States comparatively. And the United States is much, much larger of an area. When you ride trains in Europe, you'll see that first of all, there's way more of them. They're faster. They're smoother. They run on time in most cases. Amtrak is notoriously slow. It's almost always late. It's almost always behind schedule. And it's a rough ride. And the reason it's a rough ride is because on Amtrak, you are sharing physical rail with freight trains. Now, you're doing that in some places in Europe too, but they're just much better at keeping up the infrastructure of their track. So it's a much smoother, quieter ride when you're riding on the train anywhere in Europe than it is in the United States. The next thing you have to know is there's two types of train travel in Europe as far as how you get your tickets. And you're going to have to do a little research to figure out which ones you need, because in some cases it's both. For example, when we went from Paris to Lucerne, that was an example of needing both types. What do I mean by two types? One type is the type of train that you can and should book in advance, similar to how you would with Amtrak. So examples of this include the Eurostar, which travels from London it started out just going to Paris, but it goes to other places too, through the Channel Tunnel. SNCF Rail, which is French rail, where we had to take it from Paris to Basel, Switzerland. That was the high-speed train, and so I wanted to book that well in advance. I booked that on the SNCF website from home in the United States before I went. I would advise you do that. There's going to be other trains that are like that, where it's very busy, it's very popular, the tickets sell out, you need to book in advance. And those types of trains, you're going to have assigned seats. You can actually choose, what class do you want to sit in, which will determine which car you're in. On SNCF, on the high-speed rail, there's an upper and lower section. Which one do you want to sit in? We chose lower because of my bad ankle at the time, and also because we had a lot of luggage and we didn't want to have to haul the luggage upstairs to keep an eye on it. But upper will have nicer views. So you have to make decisions like that when you book those things in advance. So there are rail networks like that. The Caledonian Sleeper in the UK would be another example. Any kind of train that's going to be longer or kind of special, if you will, you're going to want to book in advance. Another example of this would be the ones in Switzerland, the Glacier Express, things like that. You're going to want to look into booking those in advance, and you're going to have assigned seats. The second type of train ticket in Europe, which is really, really handy, works more like going on the subway in a city in the United States, where you just go to the station, you buy your ticket at the station, and then you get on the next train. And in many of those cases, you don't even have to specify a specific train, a specific time. Because, for example, when we were going back to Paris from Lucerne, we got to the Lucerne station, we walked there from our hotel, it wasn't very far, and we went up to a kiosk to buy our tickets. And the tickets were just from Lucerne to Basel. And they went about, it was pretty frequent. Every half hour, every hour, something like that. And so we were just buying a general ticket for that route, just from Lucerne to Basel. We walked to where the next train was. We saw which platform it was on. And as we walked up to it, it left. So we missed that train, but it was fine because our ticket allowed us to go on any train at any time for that route from Luzerne to Basel. So we just waited until the next one. And then it was on a different platform, and we walked over to that platform and we got on that train. So that's how those work. So it's very similar to riding the subway in the United States. If you missed the train, that you needed, there's going to be another one coming soon. So just like, the DC Metro, which we went to Washington, DC recently, if you missed that one, there'll be another one in 5 minutes. So it's like that. And that's very nice in Europe that trains are that way, because you very easily still get to where you need to go. And lots of trains are like that all through Europe and the UK. I lived in Dublin when I was in high school. I took the DART, which is Dublin Area Rapid Transit. And it's a train that runs kind of up and down the coast on the east side of Ireland, and I took that all the time. Same thing. If I miss the one, there'll be another train along soon. I lived in London when I was in college, used the underground or the tube all the time. That works similarly, but so do trains going other cities in England or to Scotland or whatever. You can just go to the station and buy a ticket and get on the next one. French Regional Rail, the RER trains out of Paris, those work the same way. So like when we landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, we didn't know what time we were going to land. Maybe the flight was late. I think our flight was a little late actually. And so, we just made our way to the RER station, which is kind of attached to Charles de Gaulle Airport. And then we got a ticket similar to when we were in Luzerne, Switzerland. We just got a ticket for the RER train that we needed that went to Charles de Gaulle Airport's a long ways from central Paris, just so you know. Say you're going to Disneyland Paris. Lots of people will take the RER train to the stop for Disneyland Paris, okay? That's an RER train. And so you just buy a ticket for the RER train to the Disneyland stop, basically, and you take that train. And if you miss one, it's fine because there's going to be another one along really soon. There were lots and lots of people in the immigration line when we were in Paris that were obviously going to Disneyland. They were all going to be taking that train. But again, it's very frequent. They're very fast. They go when they say they're going to go. That's very common in Europe. We don't have anything like that on a national level or a regional level really in the United States. Amtrak, usually most of those routes will run once a day, or maybe they might only run 3 or 4 times a week sometimes. You have to plan in advance when you're going to travel on Amtrak, whereas on many of those rail lines in European countries, you don't have to plan in advance. You just have to know that that train exists, really. And then you go to the station and you buy your ticket and you get on the next one. That's all you do. Those will not have assigned seats. You just sit wherever you want. Now, there are a lot of very discounted airlines, cheap airlines in Europe that a lot of people use. And someone asked me once in a comment on one of my Europe videos, why didn't you fly? Here's the thing. Those discount airlines that they have now haven't existed that long in Europe. And because I lived over there twice before those airlines were a thing, it never would even occur to me to fly. I would only fly if maybe you were crossing the entire continent. You're flying from London to Athens or something. You're really covering a great distance. But I will say that nowadays, if you are traveling a pretty significant distance in Europe, you might want to compare the price of tickets for flying versus taking the train. I still prefer the train, and part of that is because I feel it's more responsible environmentally. France, for example, will not let you take a flight if there is a train route that you could take instead. I also really just like the train. I like the train because I like being able to see the views, especially when you're going through countries that you've never been to before. And I really like being able to get up and walk around. And I like being able to go into the lounge car, the snack car or whatever, and get something to eat and things like that. And I find the train very relaxing. Those discount airlines have drawbacks. One thing I know from watching other YouTube creators who do use them a lot, they're notoriously bad about delays, cancellations, things like that. So they're not the most reliable. And the other thing is you got to remember on any discount airline, and I've talked about this before, everything's going to be extra. If you want to choose your seat, that's going to be extra. If you want to, carry on a bag sometimes, check a bag, all of that's going to be an extra cost. So if you add it up, sometimes using those isn't really cheaper. The infrastructure for rail in Europe is just so great, especially compared to the United States, that I just think it's a shame if you don't use it because it's so convenient. I just really like traveling by train in Europe. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is when you're crossing borders. This is where you need to keep in mind if you're in the EU or not, the European Union. A lot of people don't understand that not every country in Europe is part of the European Union. For example, since Brexit, the United Kingdom, so specifically England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, are no longer part of the European Union. And when you get into Eastern Europe, you're not in the European Union in all of those countries. So you need to keep that in mind because it affects the requirements for being able to travel. One example of this, which I talked about in that one video that I linked up above when we went back from Lucerne to Paris and then on to London, is the convenience of being able to use the Eurostar to go between the EU and the UK is not as quick and efficient as it used to be. The day that we were there, it was an absolute nightmare. It's a more strict passport control now for citizens of both the EU to travel to the UK and vice versa. And then tourists is a whole other. You have to be prepared that there's going to be more stuff you're going to have to go through entering a new country when you go on the Eurostar between those two now. The other place that you're going to run into that is if you go between EU and non-EU countries in continental Europe. So if you cross from an EU country into a non-EU country, they're going to come on board the train and check your passport and your tickets and all that. And you have to be aware of that and be ready for that. Same thing the other way if you're going from a non-EU country into an EU country. Sometimes those can be at a very inconvenient time, like in the middle of the night when they come on board and want to see your documents. But the main thing you have to understand is that if you're going to be traveling a significant distance, or if you're going to be riding on a train that's either a very popular tourist type thing, or it's going to be a high-speed rail, or it's going to be something kind of special like Eurostar is, those are the kind of things that you're going to want to make sure you look into and book in advance. Because if you try to just show up for those, you're not going to be able to get on the train. But for all other trade travel, if you're, say you're based in a European city and you want to go out and explore some nearby other towns or something like that, those kind of tickets you're going to be able to buy on a whim. Just walk into the station, go up to the kiosk, buy it, and get on the train. That's no problem at all. And that's very common throughout pretty much every country in Europe and the UK. And then just the last thing I'm going to say is, because every country has its own rail network that they run and that there are even competitors beyond that, it's far too much for me to explain in one video what that experience is going to be like. Every train is going to be a little bit different. How nice it is, how clean it is, how crowded it is, what are the seats like, do they have some place I can charge my phone? Is there a snack car? All of that's going to differ depending on what train you're on. So that's much too expansive for me to cover here today, but just be aware that every train could be a little bit different and you want to check into that ahead of time if there's something in particular you're going to need. Otherwise, I hope this video was helpful to you. I have gotten a lot of questions. If you have more questions after watching this video about something specific, please leave them in the comments below and I'll answer them if I can. If you enjoy travel content like this, I would really encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. Have a great day, everyone, and safe travels.